I'd like to welcome you to this presentation of Plymouth Profiles. Plymouth Profiles is an opportunity to meet with people from the greater Plymouth area, and today we have two guests. I'd like to begin by welcoming our first guest, Dr. Barry Potvin. He is the chair of the Plymouth Board of Health. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you, Steve.
Welcome back for having been here before. Now, Barry, for people that may not have heard you before, give us a little bit of your background.
Well, I've been in Plymouth now since 2017. I have a doctoral degree in genetics and 36 years of teaching experience to pre-medical and pre-dental students on subjects such as introduction to public health and to epidemiology and microbiology and genetics. I was also the chair of the principal advisor for pre-medical students during that time.
And now with respect to the Board of Health, when did you first join the Board of Health?
It was in 2018.
And when did you become the chair?
A year or two after I arrived. I was the vice chair prior to that.
And what is the Board of Health?
What is the Board of Health?
Yes.
The Board of Health here in Plymouth, because it does vary from town to town, is an appointed 5-member board with one alternate. We are volunteers. We are uncompensated. And we're fortunate in that the other Board of Health members include 2 nurses, a pediatrician, and 2 people that have masters in public health, and myself that have long periods of experience doing that.
And what is your relationship to the staffing at the town of Plymouth, the Director of Public Health, Karen Keene?
Karen Keene and her department members provide us with administrative assistance. They are also the portion of the town officials who actually do an awful lot of paperwork. They issue permits, they receive complaints, they investigate complaints. They also provide us at all of our meetings with support services. So Karen and I have a very close relationship because we work together hand in hand. Always have since I became the chair of the Board of Health.
And Barry, you and I worked closely during COVID. You were a frequent guest on our noon update for the town of Plymouth, giving the community updates about the Board of Health recommendations on COVID protocol. But today we're taping this in March of 2025, prior to a special town meeting next month, which includes an article regarding guns. And how is it that the Board of Health happened to become involved in an article involving guns?
Well, in I believe it was June of 2024, the U.S. Surgeon General announced that gun violence had become a public health emergency for the entire nation. Shortly after that, I think the next month, Governor Healy actually signed into law a modernizing firearm laws bill, H4 885, and I believe she put an emergency clause on it, so it went into effect immediately. And that is the heart of the discussion, I guess, about Warrant Article 12, because it also included an opt-out provision. If any town wanted to vote to not ban the possession of loaded or unloaded handguns or any kind of firearm in town-owned properties or town hall, libraries, or even some of the public properties like parks.
And I happen to know that now I believe gun violence or deaths due to guns are included in statistics for children. What is that statistic?
Well, I'll be discussing that more, but I'll read you this that just came off of the CDC website, although I think it is now vanished, so I saw it before they took it down.
Okay.
Injuries from firearms are now the leading cause of death for children and teens. And it used to be car accidents, but now the two have flipped. And so in the past couple of years, firearm violence is now the leading cause of death and injuries among teenage individuals. We're really concerned about that at the Board of Health because one of our major sort of thrusts in what we do is to do anything we can to protect our teenage school-age children.
And has the Board of Health taken a position on special town meeting Article 12?
We did.
And what is that?
The Board of Health voted unanimously, there were 4 members present at the time, to actually not support warrant Article 12 because we felt that it was an unnecessary risk, and one Board of Health member felt that it was something that should legitimately and probably will ultimately be settled in the courts.
And did you have a vote and a decision?
Yes, it was.
And what is that?
It was 4-0 unanimously.
Okay. And was there any specific language that you provided with respect to the vote?
Yes. One of the Board of Health members provided not an opinion piece, but an article about what we were voting for, or what was contained in it, what were the things that had to be considered, and that was provided to the Board of Health members so that they could at least read it before they suddenly had to vote on it.
Good, good. So, Dr. Barry Potvin, we also have with us today Donna Wald. And Donna, welcome to Plymouth Profiles. And you are here at representing Grandmothers Against Gun Violence. And tell us a little bit about your background.
My background mainly is I graduated Northeastern University with a degree in social welfare. I then spent the rest of my 35 years in marketing and advertising, especially direct marketing advertising. I became president of Grandmothers Against Gun Violence 6 years ago. I was the vice president 2 years before that. And we work on legislation in Massachusetts as well as another organization which I co-founded, which works on national legislation, gun violence prevention legislation.
And what brought a group of grandmothers together for this issue?
They were, after the tragedy at Sandy Hook, they were founded much like many other organizations right after Sandy Hook. In fact, the major gun violence prevention organizations in the United States were founded after Sandy Hook. So the organization is 12 years old, and they've been really active that whole time. And for a small nonprofit to survive that long is a testament to the commitment of these people.
So people on both sides have very strong points of view about this. And this is going to be moved by a town meeting member who actually has a gun permit and carries a gun. And as I understand it, the argument in part is I have a right to own a gun, carry a gun, and therefore why should I not be allowed to bring it into public buildings? And what would your organization say about that?
Well, first of all, we are a 501c3, a nonpartisan, non-political organization. And we would say from all the research we've seen, both national research and state research, that, you know, of course there is a right to bear an arm. How far that right goes is yet to be determined by all the courts. But our argument is a little different. And our argument is that more guns are not better. We have seen shootings escalate. We also, you know, look at human nature. And the good guy with the gun argument does not hold up, because if you look statistically across the United States, there's something like 12 good guys or gals with guns who have actually stopped a shooting. It's a very dangerous situation. So let's suppose that's the argument. I can stop this shooting. Your normal citizen is not trained to function under that kind of pressure. Even I do a lot of work with the police chiefs, and they tell me even their own guys that they train an insane amount of hours under high pressure situations, lose a certain amount of muscle memory and everything in a high adrenaline situation. So the good guy with the gun really doesn't work, and it isn't effective. You have a situation with people running around a shooter, and your first problem is that really the shooter? Is there another shooter? Then the police come. Who's the shooter? So great. You do have the right to carry a gun, but is it the smartest thing to do? When you assess the risks and the reward, it is not the smartest thing to do.
And sometimes we hear from some people, and I know the statute at the state level carved out schools as not being a part of it, but we often hear with the school shootings, well, let the teachers have guns. And as the father of a teacher and the father-in-law of a teacher, I know both of them do not want to have a gun. They don't want to touch a gun. They don't want to be given a gun. So what would your group say about that?
We are strictly against teachers having guns. Number one, teachers are very special people. We do not recruit them to be carrying firearms. It's also very scary to think of a bunch of children running around in a room and you with a firearm trying to figure out what you're going to do with that firearm. At that point, in most cases, it's better that you protect the children if your safety measures are good than that you decide to pull out your gun. And, you know, the other thing with a lot of guns in the environment is a safety issue. You know, where is your gun during the day when all those little children are around? It's just not a solution. It's a knee-jerk solution to a problem that has statistical research, and there are other avenues for us to be better prepared for that. So, no.
And Dr. Potvin, did the Board of Health feel there were any of the town buildings where guns should be permitted?
That never came up. But, you know, it seemed obvious to us since I believe it's illegal to bring a firearm into federal buildings. And as a matter of fact, recently going over to Memorial Hall for the first time, I think this last year sometime, everyone was wanted going into Memorial Hall. And there was some question about why is this happening now? It didn't happen in the past. The explanation was, well, they serve alcohol beverages in Memorial Hall as part of the facilities provided to people attending. And they don't think it's a good idea to mix alcohol with firearms.
Yes, Donna.
One other point is most research suggests that when you have a shooting incident, whether it's a school shooting, which, by the way, are very different from just mass shootings, is that having a space, I have heard the argument, well, if they know there are guns there, they're not going to come there. That is absolutely unfounded and untrue. Normally, school shootings are driven by some grudge within the school, within a student, within a girlfriend, within the way they were brought up, whatever. In a lot of the mass shootings, I'm sorry to say, are driven by racism, hate, anger management problems. So this whole idea that we're safer with guns there because they'll see it as a safe space is just not supported by the research. When these shootings happen, people go there to do a certain thing, like in one of the supermarket shootings. It's no coincidence that the people that shot there were black. In some of the church shootings, it's no coincidence that there was a gripe with Christianity. In some of the school shootings, it's no coincidence that it was either a girlfriend or the kid had gone to school there, was not happy with the way he was treated there, he was bullied. So the whole argument of more guns in safe spaces in those situations, research-wise, has just not held up. And these have been people that were interviewed who lived, mass shooters who lived. They said, no, I went there for this reason. It had nothing to do with guns or not guns.
Dr. Potvin, what were some of the reasons that your members of the Board of Health gave for the decision?
Well, one thing that sort of relates to what you just heard, having a firearm in your home seems to greatly increase suicide rates.
Yeah.
There's other ways people, of course, try to commit suicide, but firearms are especially lethal and irreversible. The other thing that we thought of was, well, if firearm injuries are the leading cause of death in children and teens, where are they getting the firearms? Well, in Massachusetts, although it varies from state to state, I believe the legal age for purchasing or possessing a handgun is 21. There's a different sort of age restrictions for long guns, but they can't buy them, they can't possess them, and yet they frequently have been brought into the schools to engage in a mass shooting event. They probably, in many cases, come from the home. Why can they get them in the home? Well, they're probably not properly secured. And I think in most cases, gun owners are probably not adequately securing their firearms. There's ways to do it, and I know the arguments why I can't secure it. They could also at least keep them unloaded and keep the ammunition in a separate location. But certainly you don't want anyone that's having mental health issues or has ill intent towards especially schools to be able to just randomly pick up a firearm and carry it to the school and create that kind of horror.
Well, yeah, and another thing to this point, safe storage. The majority of gun violence does happen because of a lack of safe storage, and that fans out. You know, kids that take their parents' gun into a school shooting, guns that are stolen because they're not properly stored, unintentional shootings of children within the home, all those things. But what bothers me about concealed carry almost anywhere is, okay, so I've got my gun stored. I leave the house and I say, oh, I'm going to the municipal building. I'm going to strap up and go there. Well, what happens when you decide you're going into Target? What happens when you decide you're going to go somewhere where the owner privately has said no guns, where there's a no gun sign? So then the gun comes off. It has to be in the car stored, or it has to be somewhere. So then, and 250,000 guns are stolen out of cars every year. So there's another problem. Then we have a gun that goes into the wrong hands. And then you go home and you're like, oh yeah, oh my God, the gun's still in the car. So then you go get the gun, you throw it down somewhere in the house. I mean, it leads to more possibly unsafe storage than if you were just leaving it there to protect yourself at home. And all the attendant things that can happen if the gun is stolen, if you lose it, it's just not a good thing to have going on.
Yeah, and I understand that in Plymouth we actually had an event at a school, and a parent had a gun in a trunk, and another parent went to open the trunk to get something out of the trunk and discovered the gun, and of course it just created challenges for everybody concerned. But Barry, I know from our last meeting that you talked about student involvement with the Board of Health. In fact, you had a student that's currently serving, one that served in the past. Do your students who participate in the Board of Health have any opinion on this?
Well, I'm sure they would, but neither one of them, or at least one of them, was not able to attend the last meeting because of other school commitments. Generally speaking, they're interested and they're very excited, as are some of the school teachers and officials, that the Board of Health is looking actively for any way to protect the health and safety of the students. They know we're doing it. They know we're very, very serious about it. And I think they're fully supportive of it. We have a lot of discussions about other aspects of student health risks, including things like tobacco pouches that are currently in use, and people putting them under their tongue so they can get nicotine, right when they're not smoking.
And Donna, how is it that your organization was formed as Grandmothers Against Gun Violence? Why not Taxpayers Against or Women? What was the thought in bringing around grandmothers who have grandchildren?
That is, it was formed way before I got there. And when all those places were forming, you got Moms Demand Action, you got a whole bunch of naming conventions. And we've always struggled with that. But as we got more and more brand identity attached to it, we were not going to go, okay, citizens for whatever. So I've always struggled with that. But once again, when we founded the national organization, we moved out a little further and did Grandparents Uniting for Gun Safety. So it's something I've always struggled with, but everybody's always welcome. We have people that aren't grandparents. We have, people that don't have grandchildren. We have, people that have stepped over that line. We have men. So I always try to be really inclusive and say, look, this name is just something we have, and anybody can be here.
In my world, professionally, when we deal with abuse protection petitions and orders, if a restraining order is issued, one of the first things the judge will do is say, turn over your guns. And often these petitions are not only for a spouse or a significant other, but it could be for the children, on behalf of the children. And isn't it true, Donna, that really someone has to advocate for the rights of the children? And really it's adults. And so you as grandmothers or mothers are there to be a voice for children that may not have that voice.
That is our main thing, although we're here for everybody. And sometimes somebody will say to me, well, I'm not on your side. And I go, there is no side. I said, we are about keeping your children safe, keeping you safe, keeping your whole family safe. But yeah, grandparents are in a unique spot to influence their grandchildren, speak to them, and, protect them. That's why when the new firearms law came out, I thought my biggest deal on the new firearms law was that in the red flag law, we would get a place where mental health officials, school officials, physical health officials, everyone could advocate under a red flag law for something they saw happening for a child at risk. And we got that, and I'm really pleased with that. And we also got a grant from the federal government to, along with the DA's office on the Cape, to actually advertise and train on the red flag law, on the new red flag law. So we are really excited about that because it's a good law, but it's been really underutilized.
Dr. Potvin, at the upcoming town meeting, a member of your board will be speaking?
Yes, she's planning to.
Okay.
And there's another member of the board who will be present at the town meeting also, since he's a member of Advisory and Finance.
All right. And will there be any other action that the Board of Health will be taking?
No, we had a discussion about this, obviously, when we decided to take the vote. And we had public comment. There was quite a lot of people present. One of the things that came up was this also would then allow loaded or unloaded guns to be taken into the public libraries. And there was quite a lot of, comments made about that doesn't seem right, and there's a lot of children that go to the libraries. And we certainly want to make sure that they feel that that is a safe place for them.
My grandchildren go to the story hour there. Donna, what drew your group's attention to Plymouth? Why Plymouth?
Well, when was it? About 9 months ago, I came up to speak to the Unitarian Church, and we are always welcomed. We do a lot of work with the police, a lot of work with churches, whatever, and I just felt so welcome there and whatever. And I've always wanted to branch off the Cape because people pick on us. They say, don't you dare come over the bridge. So I said, yeah, I'm going over that bridge. And so I like it up here. I met with Barry's group. It's a big place. It has concerns, and it has volunteers up here willing to work for this cause. I'll be back in the spring for a rally, most likely. So I like being up here. I like the people up here, and it's just a team effort. I mean, so and I can't remember how I got involved in this, but I think one of my members said, do you know what's going on in Plymouth? And I said, no. And she told me, and then I became involved in this.
So, Donna, when you're not doing this, what do you like to do in your free time?
I like to garden. I do photography. I love photography because I can get in a whole other headspace that way. Grandchildren. I have 4 grandchildren living in California and Minnesota. So I flying back and forth. But I want to say one thing. One of my grandchildren attended one of our rallies. We rally at the Hyannis Rotary. And she came with me, and she stood up in one of her school things where she was supposed to talk about her parents. And she said, well, here's what my mom does, here's what my dad does. She says, but my Nana, She said she has this group of little nanas, and they go out there and they stand at this rotary and they fight so we will be free from gun violence. And she said, you know, those women are heroes. So it just shows you the impact you can make on any generation at any given time if you do the right thing.
And Dr. Potvin, what are you doing in your free time?
Well, I'm often looking at the CDC as the Department of Public Health websites, Johns Hopkins Department of Public Health website.
Oh, I love that.
But when I finally get tired of doing all that, my wife yells at me to stop. I will go out and take power walks. I'll swim laps in the pool. I'm not much of a television fan, but I do follow some sports. And I have hobbies that I suppress so I can do all of this for the town. I used to be actively involved in family history and genealogical research. That's when I found out that I had relatives who were Minutemen here in Massachusetts.
Good. And if someone just joined us, how would they contact the Board of Health?
Really, the only way to do that is through the Department of Public Health.
Okay.
If someone sends a message or a voicemail to the department, and it's something has to do specifically with the Board of Health, they forwarded it to me.
And if someone didn't get to see the entire presentation, what would be one takeaway you'd want them to leave?
We are going to do everything we possibly can to protect the students in the town against the possibility of gun violence, including suicides, or with anything else that threatens their health and safety.
Donna Wald, how would people contact you or your organization?
I would suggest going on the website, which is Grandmothers Against Gun Violence, Cape Cod, and just put a chat in the contact, and I personally will get with you.
And what's your big takeaway from today?
My big takeaway, and I will say this again and again, and it is research backed because I see a lot of research. We are not better with more guns. We respect the Second Amendment that you have a right to protect yourself in your home with your gun. But as a society overall, we are not better with more guns. We already have 450 million guns in this country, and we don't need to have them in public spaces, and it's damaging to the reputation of the country as a whole. It's damaging to our children, and we will fight relentlessly no matter what we have to do to save our children and everybody.
Donna Wald, thank you.
Thank you.
Grandmothers Against Gun Violence. Barry Potvin, thank you for coming back again as the chair of the Plymouth Board of Health. This completes this segment of Plymouth Profiles, but please stay tuned. We're going to be having a second half today. We're going to be joined by Mark Pothier. He is the editor of the Plymouth Independent, and we look forward to meeting with him. Please stay tuned. Thank you. Welcome back to this presentation of Plymouth Profiles, where we meet with someone from the greater Plymouth community. And today, I'm delighted in having as my guest someone that I have known for many years during changes throughout the town of Plymouth. And we're welcoming Mark Pothier, editor of Plymouth Independent. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. And Mark, I want to talk a little bit about your past. Tell us, where did you grow up? What was your education?
I'm still getting educated every day,
Well, we are
as we
every
all
day,
do, right? But I grew up primarily in Andover, and I had really never even been to the South Shore other than driving through on the way to the Cape as a kid. Eventually, I ended up living in Duxbury after I left my career as a musician, and a very tiny apartment. It sounds glamorous, but it was actually an illegal apartment above a store near Hall's Corner, and I needed a job. And I saw an ad for this fledgling weekly paper called the Pembroke Reporter. It's part of a group of papers called MPG newspapers, which, of course, you remember well, maybe not always fondly, but you remember it well.
Fondly.
Yes, and the centerpiece of that, of course, was the Old Colony Memorial. And I eventually became the executive editor of that group of papers. I think we had 14 or 15 at the end, but the OCM was always the crown jewel of it. And so that was my start in journalism. I learned, as a $5 an hour reporter, running through the wild streets of Pembroke and learning the ropes that way and working my way up.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the people that you and I were fortunate enough to know in those early days, because some of them were mentors of mine, and that would be Roger Miles and Phyllis Hughes.
Correct. Roger, both of those were people that were very influential in my career and offered me a lot of guidance, but at the same time, a lot of latitude. Roger was a born entrepreneur, and I think this was before the term was fashionable. He had whiteboards and everything, and list your top 3 best ideas, and then we'll get them down to the top 2, and that kind of thing, way before people were. And he went on to do his own thing in Florida, and I'm still in touch with him now. He's a big supporter of the Plymouth Independent. Phyllis was the person who brought me up through the ranks, and she was the publisher of MPG newspapers. And I think the greatest thing that she taught me was that the strength of journalism was keeping the editorial part of it separate from the business side. And that sounds easy, but these days, of course, those lines are gone. Back then, we really did have a wall between business and the news side. And Phyllis knew that even when that caused her grief, which on occasion I would cause her grief by writing something or other that didn't please every single advertiser, but she knew in the end that it would make it stronger because the readership would see that we were independent, that we had integrity, and that we weren't just doing the bidding of the powers that be in town. So Phyllis unfortunately died way too young, as you know. The last thing I'll say about her is as a woman business person in town, she broke so many barriers, as you know, became the leader of clubs. She did a lot of charity work. She was, of course, the publisher of the Old Colony Memorial, which had a lot of influence. And at that time, there weren't many women in those roles, if any, in Plymouth, probably none in Plymouth.
She certainly was a groundbreaker, dear friend in our Rotary Club. She was first woman president, and so many things that she did that were trailblazing.
The Children's Christmas Fund every year, which was a very big deal.
So that was the Old Colony. And when did you leave there?
I left the Old Colony in 2000 when I was very fortunate and won a Nieman Fellowship at Harvard University, which is a full year free ride at Harvard with 11 other American journalists and 12 international journalists. And they told me going in it would be a life-changing event. It certainly was a life-changing year, I should say. And it certainly was a life-changing year for me. And I learned so much. I met so many people. And after that, lo and behold, suddenly I was appealing to the Globe because I had that on my resume. And at that time, the Globe was expanding its suburban coverage. And I fit pretty well into that because they wanted to expand on the South Shore with a section called Globe South. So I became the first editor of Globe South. But I was at MPG for 16 years. And I think Phyllis thought that one day I would be the publisher. And to be honest, she was disappointed that I left. She got over it, but I think it came as a shock to her. For me, I just saw that the newspaper business was changing. The Lowe family that had owned the Old Colony and all the papers had sold it. By then, a guy named Jim Plew had come in. He was a venture capitalist guy, and he brought us into the digital age. We actually had a website for Boston.com existed, which is kind of amazing. And I knew that at that point in my career, I was already in my 40s. I had never worked in a daily newspaper, and I had this opportunity to go do that and also not start out covering fires in Dorchester at 2 a.m., sure, going in as an editor. So I couldn't pass it up, and I had to do it. I didn't like leaving weekly newspapers and local news, but I could see it wasn't going to be the same. Corporations were coming in, and these family-owned operations were no longer sustainable, unfortunately.
Yeah. And so how long were you at the Globe?
I was at the Globe more than 22 years. So if someone, I thought, wow, I was at the Old Colony for 60 years, and someone said, well, your next job, you're going to stay there even longer. I did, and it was incredible. As a kid, I grew up reading the Globe at kitchen table in Andover, and when I was at St. John's Prep, I was the co-editor of the newspaper there, and it's something other than music. Writing was the only other thing I knew. So it was a dream job for me to get that. And I had a lot of roles at the Globe over those years, primarily as the business editor, but I also spent about 18 months on the other side of the wall on the editorial board, opinion pages during the 2016 election. And I came back to business, and I also did a lot of writing for the Globe magazine, which was just a thrill for me.
And I know at one point both you and Bob Knox were there together at the Globe.
Correct. I poached Bob from the Old Colony when I went to Globe South, and he wrote a lot of stories covering Plymouth. Globe South covered 48 cities and towns, but Plymouth was, of course, near and dear to me, and and it was already growing fast back then, which is more than 20 years ago. And I knew it was important that the Globe had some robust coverage of Plymouth, and Bob knew Plymouth.
Yeah. And I know he passed this life recently.
Unfortunately, yeah. Bob died last year, and he was actually doing the culture column for the Plymouth Independent at the time, and he had some health problems and declined and was unable to continue doing that. We miss him terribly.
When did you leave the Globe?
I left the Globe on September 5th, 2023, and I started my new job on September 12th. I took an entire week off.
And so why? What led to all of that?
Well, I was approached by some of the folks had, prior to me getting involved, had started a board. They realized there was a huge news desert. It's kind of become a cliched phrase, but it was true here in Plymouth, for reasons we can go into, but the Old Colony Memorial was no longer functioning as a legitimate news source. These folks were concerned and wanted to start an independent news website. When I looked at the people that were involved, I was really impressed. They weren't just well-meaning people, with nothing wrong with well-meaning people. They were well-meaning, but also brought a lot of credentials to it. And in particular, the person who was an advisor to them, Walter Robinson, better known to me as Robbie and others at the Globe, a legendary spotlight editor at the Globe. He's played by Michael Keaton in the movie Spotlight, which I always bring up because people say, oh, him. And he has a lot of gravitas. And they wanted me to be on the board, which of course I said, yes, I need to be on the board. I need to be involved in this. I started in local journalism. Eventually it came around to, we've looked around for an editor and we don't see it. We're looking at the editor. You're the editor. I believe Robbie actually said those words to me one day when we're sitting having coffee in a local restaurant, and he said, you need to do this. This will be your legacy. And I thought about it, and I thought about that old saying that, you leave your job one of three ways. You leave on your own, you get fired, or you die. And things always change, and life changes. And it was a great run at the Globe, and I could have continued to do it. I was getting to a point in my career where I thought I might want to do something different. And this just seemed so meaningful and important. I didn't know what I would do after the Globe, and suddenly this thing was right in front of me, and I knew I had to do it. Now, I'm compressing about 2 months of agonizing into that 3-minute answer, but that's what I did.
And so tell us now about the Plymouth Independent. I mean, how is that different from the Old Colony that we enjoyed all those years?
Well, it's different in one, it's much smaller. It's me and 2 full-time reporters and a handful of really good freelancers who are working for far less than they should be getting. And of course, there's no print product as well. because the cost of a print product is prohibitive, and newspapers would be doing a lot better if people still wanted to read print products. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which we don't need to go into here, but we knew that we had to make it a free site to get as many people as possible. And beyond that, I don't think the fundamentals are that much different. We want to bring local news back, and that's what we've done since we launched in November. But we want accountability reporting, but I also wanted to have a full spectrum of the community, hence the culture section, an art section, things like that. So people have a sense of community. It's something I hear every time I talk to groups, especially from newcomers, people that maybe been here 8 or 10 years, they consider themselves newcomers. And they have told me many times that until the Plymouth Independent started, they loved living in Plymouth, but they didn't really know anything about the community. They didn't know who the public officials were. They didn't know where various places were. They didn't have a sense of belonging. And they tell me that now they do. The old colony definitely served that purpose when it was around. Even if people didn't like it always, they had to read it. Everything was in there. And it was a pretty great paper, not because of me, but because we had a great staff that brought different interests and strengths to it. And again, because we had that strong foundation in Phyllis and the structure that we weren't going to cave in on a tough issue.
And I think people feel connected when they have the opportunity to somehow communicate, both to hear from your reporters and you, but also to give back if they want to write something or send something in.
Absolutely. We have your review section. We've published hundreds of letters already. What you said about connection is really important, because many of us, myself included, increasingly have felt disconnected in this world. And there are very few places, community gathering places anymore. This is an online one. And it's important because we're lonely, we're depressed, we're fighting with each other over ridiculous things that go nowhere, and everything is black and white, and there's no gray area. Now, can we solve all that? No. But by having this platform where we can get facts out there to people and also let them have their opinion. We don't write editorials. Occasionally I'll write a column, but it's mostly stories that are based on facts and what's happening in the news or what people are doing that's interesting.
And when you mentioned earlier about I like the old colony, I love the old colony. And one of the things early on when I became an elected town official, I served on the school committee. And when I was chair, the press wasn't always favorable to everything. But still, it was very important to have an opportunity to be able to communicate to the community. And I've always felt as an official that we really need the cable, the radio, and the print media, because people get their information from all different sources and not everybody gets it the same way. So certainly having the independent is a great opportunity, whether government recognizes it or not. You serve a very useful function as we try to get our information out to the community.
I think a lot of government officials do recognize it. We've had, of course, our turbulence, we should say, and it surprised me to the extent that happened and continues to happen in some instances. But I think overall people, including officials appointed, elected, or town employees, understand the importance of it. Will we get it right all the time? Of course not. But as you said, these various reliable, vetted sources, eventually you are going to get to the truth. And just as important, people like you or whoever can get their point out and maybe counteract or at least lay out the facts in the face of this onslaught of online untruths and rumors and things like that sadly for many people has become the primary source of so-called information.
We're taping this in March of 2025. We've got a town meeting coming up next month in April.
I can't wait, Steve.
And you've already highlighted at least one of the articles that'll be coming before town meeting. And it's useful, I think, for not just an elected official or the town meeting members, but for the town as a whole to know in advance an issue that's coming up. I mean, as soon as your story hit on Article 12 initially, which was the gun article, immediately I'm at the gym and people are talking about it the next day in the locker room, because it's something where people have very strong points of view on both sides.
Right. That certainly is a hot button issue. Personally, I think it's a bit of a red herring, and I think there are a lot of other issues that are much more urgent and fundamental to the stability and growth of the town, but these tend to be the kinds of things that get people talking, partially because people have strong opinions, as you said, and you can boil it down to a simplistic argument, whereas housing, for example, is a real tough one. People say, don't build anymore. Of course, I hear that all the time. I see that in comments on Facebook in response to some of our stories, and I'll gently reply, I understand your frustration, but that is not reality. Please read the story. And of course, the answer is people need to get involved in some way, or else all they're going to be able to do is complain on social media, which ultimately does nothing.
Last year I interviewed all of the candidates who are running for local state office, state rep, state senator, and I asked them when they knocked on doors, what was the number one issue? It was affordable housing, affordability, which at the time surprised me, but the more I thought about it, and recently I met someone who was attending a conference on housing from another state, and they were talking about, they changed the phraseology a little bit to attainable housing. And I just thought, really, there are so many people in this community, really in the Commonwealth, in the country, that are struggling to deal with housing, and it really is important.
It is, and Plymouth's really at a crossroads. We have folks who lived here their whole lives, and they're, the phrase is real estate poor, and I can see that that is a burden, and for some people, it's a day-to-day struggle just to keep up with the taxes, the maintenance of their home, that kind of thing. At the same time, the value of their property has gone up, and they have this asset that provides some generational wealth for your families, that kind of thing. And then you have folks that are newer to the town, many of whom are more affluent. A lot of them live in the Pine Hills, which I believe has been a really beneficial part of the town. I know there's some tension still existing between, say, the old timers, and not necessarily in age, and those newcomers. But those folks are many of them are the ones who are getting involved. They have a lot of ideas. They have a lot of expertise from their careers and educations, and they love living in Plymouth, and they want to be part of it. And my dream is somehow these two ends can find a middle ground to work together, because Plymouth is an attractive place. It's going to continue to grow. It's already become the hub of this part of the state. And there's no going back to the quaint old times that people remember. It's not going to be that sleepy town anymore, but it doesn't mean that it can't be a great town. I think it is a great town with a lot of growing pains. I always, when people tell me, like, oh, you can't drive downtown, there's so much traffic, it reminds me of that old Yogi Berra thing. I think about a restaurant that nobody goes there anymore because it's too crowded. There's a reason why people are coming to Plymouth, because it's attractive. And also, I look back to the 80s when I came, in the 90s, the recession in the 90s, I should say, and going late 80s into the 90s. And of course, you were here. And downtown was desolate. It was not good. And you had your quiet, but there was no economic growth. And the town was veering towards a crisis with the nuclear power plant and the deregulation of the energy industry. And we could see that town had made a terrible mistake in relying on that power plant to pay more than a quarter of the town's taxes for years. And it allowed all these 3-bedroom capes to be built, West Plymouth and Manomet. Cheap land, cheap homes. And it was great for a while, but it was an illusion. And we had to come to grip with reality. So now we're in reality and we're moving forward. And the town has a lot that it can achieve. And I think the reception that we've gotten at the Plymouth Independent, we have nearly 30,000 people on our email list now. We have millions of page views, and we have more than about 125,000 unique visitors every 4 weeks. That says to me that people are starving for news. They're interested. They want to know more about this place that they live in.
We see at the national level a lot of criticism about the media. And people often refer to it as the fourth estate. And locally, we had the little challenges earlier with Town Hall and the Independent. But what's your view about the importance of having a strong media such as the Independent?
It's crucial to our democracy. There are forces in this country that want to attack the media at every turn. And they have been somewhat successful in eroding public faith in the media. And are there a lot of bad media outlets? Of course, yeah, there are. And there are still some very solid ones, lots of them. They're doing good work. My former employer, the Boston Globe, that kind of thing. And there are stories that come out in the Globe that had the Globe not covered it, we would never know about these things. The same for the New York Times, the Washington Post, and others. And at the same time, there is such distrust. And there's also the ability of anybody to portray themselves as a reporter or putting up news. And you see it all over Facebook constantly. And it doesn't matter. That cumulatively, I think, erodes the foundation before. The other thing I would say is that the kind of establishment media that we both grew up on, Walter Cronkite and that kind of thing, and that kind of gravitas, they also kind of had a sense of privilege, or that we are the authority, we're the only authorities. And that's not necessarily the case anymore. We have sites like ProPublica that are not mainstream media, and they're doing incredible work and winning Pulitzer Prizes and changing lives. So it's really important, because I do think our democracy is at threat of something bad happening here right now for reasons that are obvious to many of us. And I think that at the local level, that's the foundation. Local journalism, in local news, that's the foundation of it all. If that gives way, then the rest of it will collapse eventually. And in some cases, in some communities, that has happened.
If people want to contact you, how do they do that?
It's easy. They can email me. It's mark@PlymouthIndependent.org. And you just go to PlymouthIndependent.org to see the site. Reporters' emails are at the end of every story. And I try to respond to everything as best I can. Sometimes I respond on Facebook, but I'm very accessible.
And what can people do to help the Independent?
Well, the obvious one is to donate. We do need money. We need a lot more money than we have. We're spending more money than we're taking in. And if you can give a little bit every month and just sign up for that on the website, that helps, because we can count on that revenue. Spread the word to other people, because there's still more people. I still run into people in town that have not heard of the Plymouth Independent. So we want as many people as possible to sign up for our email, to get on the site. The email doesn't lock you into any buying anything or anything like that. I would say about money is that it's like buying groceries. People say, I gave, and I'm grateful for that, but now it's 8 months later, and I bet you've gone to the grocery store many times in those 8 months, so consider it the same thing, or consider it like your HBO subscription or whatever you might get, and try to look at us that way, because we need to grow. I need help, frankly. I'm working 7 days a week. And I said that I would do that to get this thing up and running, but I don't want to do it like that indefinitely at this stage of my career. I want to stay involved, but I'd like to have a younger person take over for me at some point and bring in more reporters. There's way more news than we can possibly get to. I get dozens of requests for stories every single day.
What do you do in your free time?
Well, a lot of people see you running and walking around
know you
town.
run. I
I
know
do
you're a
that in the
runner.
morning. That's my stress thing. I still make music. We love going to local restaurants. I think we've probably put a couple restaurant owners' children through college at this point on the times that we've been doing that. And so that's pretty, those are my big interests in music. I still make music.
What would be your big takeaway today for people watching?
The takeaway they want them to, what they should have as a takeaway is that whether it's me or whether it's somebody else, having the Plymouth Independent here is really important for the town of Plymouth. It's kind of a glue that will allow people to feel like they're part of the community, allow them to more easily get involved, allow them to find out things, and also to offer their opinions about things that are going on. And without that, we have government operating in the dark. We have cultural institutions that can't get the word out the way that they should. We have so much missing without a robust local news presence. And I'm just thrilled that this board thought of the idea and that we're back doing it.
Great. Mark Pothier, editor of Plymouth Independent. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you for joining us today on the Plymouth Profiles. And please join us for presentations. My name's Steve Triffletti. Good day.